This podcast is in partnership with Fill Your Boots. My mate Sean Phelan has been matching clubs with players and players with clubs for over 6 years to help get grassroots rugby games played. Head on over to fybrugby.com to register yourself or your club to help grow the game. You'll also be part of the Rugby social network and enjoy tons of resources, special deals and FYB TV. Go register at fybrugby.com today.
He's somebody that never played rugby at any kind of a school level. He just had an amazing physique because he spends a lot of his week working out, and is a real example to players from every background of what you can achieve with hard work and dedication. And still doing his gigs. We'd laugh because we'd say, "Right, lads, who's going out?" And he goes, "Sorry, lads, I'm catching a plane to Cyprus tonight. I've got to do a gig at 3 a.m.
Hello amateurs, welcome to episode 82 of the Amateur Rugby Podcast, here to help soothe your Sunday morning hangover with some wonderful rugby chat about the grassroots of the game. I'm your host Tim, and today I'm in southwest London, where training for the Great Rugby Run is now all but complete. I went out yesterday and ran 30 miles, with various stops along the way to refuel. This was to mimic the toughest day that I have planned on this year's run, and I'm glad to say I made it through. The plan is to run 500 miles in 25 days from rugby club to rugby club around Scotland, starting on the 7th of September in Oban and finishing at Melrose on October 1st. It's all in aid of the My Name's Doddy Foundation. Head over to thegreatruggerrun.org to find out all the details and get involved. How did you enjoy last week's episode with Bruce Aitchison? What a guy. His passion for the game, his passion for clubland and his passion for his country is incredible. If you subscribe to his Happiness Is podcast yet, go and give it a try. I'd love to hear your feedback on last week's show at AM Rugby Podcast on Twitter or email to hello@amateurrugbypodcast.com. But my guest this week is London Cornish Director of Rugby of 20 years, Dickon Moon. This interview was recorded in August of 2022, and we talked about Dickon's time as a player at Old Patesians, the challenges and achievements of 20 years as DOR at London Cornish, the 60th anniversary of the club, the current issues with hot weather and hard pitches, Dickon's thoughts on the new restructure of the men's adult competition, and I kid you not, we even talk about South London garage and hip hop collective So Solid Crew. Dickon does not shy away from sharing his well thought out and reasoned opinions. I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Please welcome Dickon Moon. Dickon Moon, welcome to the Amateur Rugby Podcast.
Thanks, Tim. I've looked forward to it.
Good man. Now, I understand you've holidayed recently in Scotland, and that's somewhere where I'm intending to go very, very soon on the Great Rugby Run. So I'm just interested in your experiences.
Yeah, I absolutely love Scotland. I've been fortunate enough to work right across the whole of the country in the Western Isles and through both the Highlands and the Lowlands. And my aunt and uncle live up there. So they live at the foot of the Cairngorms, and what a beautiful place it is. And so I took my kids and my wife up there on the sleeper, and we went into the Cairngorms. And absolutely beautiful, very relaxed.
Wonderful, wonderful. That makes me look forward to my trip even more. But let's get back to you and London Cornish. 20 years as a director of rugby is just the most incredible thing in my mind. Talk me through how, A, you got into it in the first place, and B, how you've managed to keep thriving at it for 20 years.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, it was interesting the way I got into it because I came to London from Old Patesians, who at that time were a National League club, and I tried out at a few of the clubs in the area, the usual suspects. And I found that even though at that time we were more senior than quite a few of those clubs at Old Pats, it was very cliquey, and I couldn't break in to even at training, couldn't break into some of the circles. So I got approached at a county championship final by some lads who were handing out flyers. I joined the club. I broke my arm on my debut against Streatham and Croydon. I broke my arm in 5 places on my comeback at Teddington. And so that was that. I was 35 then. And so the lads at the end of the season dinner asked me if I'd considered being their first ever director of rugby. And I found out once I did a bit of research that my folks knew the founders of the club, and it just seemed natural. So I felt that with the help of a friend of mine, a guy called Norm Burden, that we could maybe get the club up a couple of leagues. And I've just not stopped, really. It becomes something that's in your blood. And I'm such a Cornish rugby enthusiast and a rugby enthusiast generally that I've stuck with it. And also I'd say I'm completely unpaid. I find the amateur part of the role utterly fulfilling. The ability to make change. It's actually easier when you're not paid because it comes from the heart, and everything you do, you're doing for all the right reasons. And so it's something that I've done now for 20 years, and I'm not quite sure how to stop.
Well, I mean, why would you stop if you're still enjoying it, which you clearly are?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what were some of the challenges that you've had over the years in that role?
Well, when we began, we used to train actually in a really badly lit part of the sort of backside of Chiswick. And we wouldn't get many folks turning up to training once pre-season had started. You might get a dozen at most. And so we moved initially to Battersea Park to make it a bit more central, a bit easier for lads to get to. But even then, we were not inside the stadium at Battersea Park. We were using the light that was cast off the floodlights at the ground, outside the ground itself, on just whatever ground we could take. And so each season incrementally we've improved that a lot, and eventually we moved into the park, had a third of a pitch, which wasn't easy because it's also used by hammer throwers, so it had massive pot marks in it, which we had to put cones around to avoid. And you look back on it now and you think it's mad, but we eventually got wind that Rosslyn Park were putting in a 4G. And now we were able to give lads, first-rate training facilities because we have half the pitch once a week on a Wednesday night, which is fantastic.
Yeah, amazing. I love those grassroots stories where it's literally all about the love of the game and you just want to get out there and throw a ball about with your mates, and just however you can make that happen, you make it happen. But tell me about the training facilities you're enjoying now and how much benefit that's been. Yeah,
it's been great because one of the problems we had at Battersea Park is that we weren't in control of when the ground wasn't available to us. So we got to a point where often we'd only train twice a month, and maybe once a month. And that was hopeless as you go up through the leagues. And we did, we have gone up. In my 20 years here, I make the joke actually that we've risen, I think, 5 or 6 levels. And if we replicate that in the next 20 years, watch out the Prem. So we now have really facilities that any club would be happy with in the national leagues, for sure. Albeit that's not our home ground, it's our training ground. But it's great for lads who want to come and join us.
Yeah, and again, another great location as well. Very, very useful.
Right on the Barnes station. Great location, well floodlit, and we're very happy with the arrangement.
Good stuff. And tell me a little bit about the grounds here and their history and how long you've been here and the improvements that you've made along the way.
Yeah, so we've been here over 50 years, and when I arrived, we were playing on pitches across the brook out the back. It's a cracking pitch. I used to call it the Theatre of Dreams because there's a natural amphitheatre over there. But the problem was it was a bit of a trek from the changing rooms to the pitch. And we don't have our own bar facility here. So you'd have to make players and supporters trek over there, and then they'd have to trek back, and then they'd go and find somewhere else to eat and drink. And we used to be at a pub up the road. Once Harlequins moved from here, and this was, as we've said in the outset, their training facility, we got the pitches out front, right in front of us as we're looking out at them now. And we also managed to move from the changing facilities that are around the corner to the ones here, so we've got our own dedicated space. That's taken little incremental improvements year on year to the point we're at now. And I always try and do something every year to improve the players' lot, so that if there are players who've been here a long time, they see change every year, be it in the coaching team or otherwise. So this year we're hoping to get a portable scoreboard, a proper one, electric one, because we've been using something that looks like a reinvigorated cricket scoreboard for the last few seasons. So, it's something that we improve year on year. We love the ground and the facility. We are trying to negotiate with Thomas's school to be able to use a bar and dining facilities upstairs. That would be great to have our own clubhouse here. That the issue of sustainability for me, what happens when I'm not doing this anymore, is really important. So number one thing is to get a facility that means we can do everything here, and the second thing is to have a sustainable source of players. So the minis is something that we have started. We started a taster session in the summer. We're going to run more during the course of the season, and it went down really well. So that's a big focus for me, is developing that in the next year or two.
Okay, amazing. There's quite a few things to dig into there. The bar facilities being as part of the club, I think I've visited loads of clubs where they are separate, and people, like, they make do, they make it work, and I'm sure that's the case with you as well. But having that integrated next to the pitch in the grounds does make a huge difference. Is that what you're anticipating and what you're hoping for?
It is. There's a slight sort of, a slight dilemma, because the challenge we have in a dedicated space here is we'd have to be out of it by 6 o'clock, because it is a premise that is owned by the Wimbledon Common Conservators. So, they'd have to let us out of here at 6. Whereas the Roehampton Cricket Club, where we've got a dedicated facility in the winter, we can stay there till we want to stay there. It's licensed. So there is a slight dilemma going on at the club about that. But having said that, we're now in a new league, Regional 2 Thames, where we've got clubs coming from as far away as Aylesbury and Amersham. They're likely to come in coaches, and it's tough to say to them on the one side, come to our ground, and then straight afterwards you've got to go and take them somewhere else to have their post-match, to have your post-match pasty. We're very proud of our post-match meals, as you'd expect as card-carrying Cornishmen. That's something that we're debating about right now.
Yeah, okay. Interesting decision, that one. I'll be interested to see how that pans out. Now, on to the next thing you mentioned, the minis and juniors. So that's a new section that you're trying to start here.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has struck me in developing a rugby club over a period of time is that you shouldn't try and take on too much yourself. And when you don't have money involved, and we have a tiny turnover here, you can only do incremental improvements. And big things like setting up a mini section requires somebody else to stick their hand up. And we've got this amazing guy called Will Carey-Gibbs, who's a head of PE at a local school, who is our first team hooker. One of our first team hookers, has been for many years, and he stuck his hand up, and so that's what you need. And I've often said that with the way we run the club, it's me recruiting with the lads every summer, trying to get people who are moving up here, possibly from the West Country, who want to train once a week and play at a decent level. But sometimes that's kind of top down, and we really need to build bottom up as well. And I kind of sense that's a path as well to getting a girls team, a women's section up and running too. My daughter is one of the most fervent advocates of me setting up a mini section. She's about to be 8, and so I'm being driven from home as much as anywhere else to get this up and running.
Fantastic, I love that. So the next thing, I guess, is, and you've mentioned the word a few times already, and it's quite apparent through everything that you've done so far, is sustainability. Just building and building and building slowly, not trying to go too fast at any given time. Has that been like a really conscious decision, or was that just how it started and how you felt like it should carry on?
It's a little bit of a mix of both. In the early days, I remember when I said to the committee back in the day, I was thinking of getting a programme. And they were like, well, we only get 5 men and a dog coming to watch. And so it's not really about that. It's about the branding, it's about sponsorship, and it's about how we're perceived as a club, both to visiting and potential new players. And at first they laughed me out of town, so I did it myself. I used to print them on a printer on just A4 and fold it over, and I'd do it myself and run off 20 copies. And eventually they realised that actually there might be something in it, and we got attendances started going up. And now we have an amazing glossy programme that's the best. I think it's the best in the league. It's got no advertising in it. It's got a lot of dynamic pages. It's only 12 pages long, but it's a cracker, and our sponsors love it. And even though they may not be in attendance, they love having copies of it. Our old boys love it because we PDF it to them wherever they are in the world, and we give copies to the players on both teams. And I'm very proud of those sort of things. But it was a conscious decision to get it up and running. It's been incrementally improved since we've done it, and that's a good example of how we've achieved things. It's just it's just you come up with the idea, the concept, and you just improve it year on year.
That's something very close to my heart. The old programs. I kept many of mine. In fact, the vast majority, I would say, and I love looking back through them every now and again. And in fact, it came up. There was an Old Patesians one being sold on eBay recently from when we were at level 5 or something like that. So, there's definitely some ongoing value there as well somehow.
I was never, when I played at Old Patesians in Cheltenham for a decade, right in the heyday really of the Pats, as we went through the leagues and won the Intermediate Cup. And I was in the second team for most of that, which was the West of England merit table. I played a few games in the ones, but I used to get chucked in for like mats and away in the County Cup. Thanks, lads. There was a guy at fullback, which was my position, called Scott Pollock, who was a better player than I was, and actually it taught me a lot going training and having someone like Scott around who was very humble. That there's a lot of mileage in making second team players train with the first team, and it helped me understand more about how to run a rugby club. I look back now, and I'm not big on regrets, but one thing I don't have is any pictures of me playing rugby for the Pats. So if anyone listening to this from the Old Pats and they've got a photo of me playing in Old Pats gear, I don't think my family or any of our players here really believe me when I tell them I used to get nicknamed the Cornish Rhinoceros. And when I played for Old Pats, and let me tell you, the West of England merit table then was a cracking league. We had Exeter 2s in it. I remember them coming up to us playing at our ground, which was then in Everest Road in Cheltenham, and on the reclaimed landfill. And their warm down after the game was longer than our warm up. And I remember thinking they're probably different sort of calibre from us.
And did you win?
No, we didn't. We ran them close. I have a claim to fame. I scored our only try down at Exeter United, down at their ground. So I was very proud of that. I think Keith Brooking was playing against us that day, and you look back on some of those games, and a bit like you, they didn't do programmes of twos games, but I've kept records of the scores. But as I say, I'd love to get some evidence I really did play for the Pats.
Yeah, it's those programs are a wonderful thing, and to any clubs out there listening, and you're thinking about maybe stopping them, don't keep them going. It's not necessary for everybody, but there's certainly a large portion of your club that I'd imagine really, really love it.
Yeah, and I go further than that. There's a few clubs like Esher, and I went to Esher recently, and they've put all their programs online, so you have to download them. It's just not the same. You want a physical thing. It's a bit like a newspaper. I'm not somebody that's ever going to read the newspaper online. I want a physical newspaper. I want a physical program. We'll email to people that are not able to be here a PDF, but we're always going to print them. I think the physical item is something that will be long lost when it finally goes, if it finally goes. And I'd implore clubs that are thinking of going that way to revisit that decision.
Hear, hear. Okay, London Cornish, 60th anniversary this year?
Yeah, it's this season coming up. We've got a big shindig down in Newquay at the Bristol Hotel. I think a players flying in from all over the world for that. And we've invited Graham Dorr, who I hope he's going to come along. I think he is. And it's something we're really proud of as a club. There is actually a committee separately of lads. I say lads; they'll thank me for that. Of old boys that are running the show, and I think it's something that we will have emblazoned across the programme. We'll have something on our stash this season to reflect it. It's something that I think will help us get together groups of people that haven't got together previously. So watch this space. We're going to be putting a lot out there about it.
Newquay, I'm sure that'll be a quiet day, will it?
I think you can imagine. It's October, so perhaps that's the right time to go to Newquay. As somebody that hasn't frequented Newquay that much, I will be staying nearby, but probably not right in the heart of Newquay myself.
Fair enough. Now, talk to me a little bit about some of the players you've had here at London Cornish, because I understand you've managed, by hook or by crook, to pick up quite a few good players along the years.
We have. I take an attitude. I'm a headhunter by trade. That's my job, and so I'm never afraid to ask people. And I worked my way round, this is true, quite a lot of the Rugby World Cup winning 2003 squad to tell them that they've not really done anything till they played for Cornish. And I did originally, I've lost it now, but I had an amazing photo of Martin Johnson giving me that look that only Martin Johnson can. And I said to him, 2003 World Cup's great, but you haven't played for Cornish. So I tried it on with everybody. We've had a couple of really cracking players. So in that 2003 side, there were a load of lads that played together, the England under-18, under-17 squad, Will Greenwood and Johnny Wilkinson amongst them. There was a lad there that played with them as well in that squad called Simon Brading. And Brades went on to play for Bedford in the Chariots of Fire era. And for some reason, he ended up here. And he was a centre then, but he played number 8 for us. And the only clue that he played at any level was one of his ears was extraordinary. And I hope, Brades, if you're listening now, it's calmed down a lot that year. And he was a wonderful player. And interestingly, Brades was also one of those players who constantly needed reaffirmation of his position in the team, even though he'd played at a higher level than all of us. He was always somebody that was keen to know that he was doing all right. So he needed regular feedback, and we gave it to him. And he was here for a long time. And was great to have around the club. Wonderful hands on him. More recently, I was about 7 or 8 years ago, I was doing an NCT class, my first one with my wife, and one of the people there, girls, said, "Oh, my husband's not here yet. He's running a bit late. We've just moved from Perpignan." I thought, well, that's interesting. She said, "Well, you've been playing rugby over there," and I thought, "Perpignan, can't move over here." So I looked it up and worked out pretty quickly that it was Dan Leo. And I became really good friends with Dan. And he was then, I think he went to London Welsh or London Irish or one of the two, and was looking to do something else with his career. And so I offered him a player coaching role here, and we really had no money. I think we offered him $2,500 to come and do it. And he stayed here. He did 3 seasons in 4. He did 1 at Bishop Stortford, and he was massive to have around. I mean, both in terms of his coaching philosophies. He was just he is genuinely one of the nicest guys to have around, and boy did he hit hard. And I know all the lads that played against us in those years when we won, I think it's London 2 Southwest unbeaten, will attest to the fact that he was a real weapon to have around. We always worried that some of the referees, I think, at that level, and by and large, by the way, I think the refs in this region are fantastic and have a lot of time for the London Society of Refs. We always felt there was always a bit of a game on to try and see who could send him off the first, but he never got sent off while he was here because he hit so hard. You worry that he's hit illegally, and he was just a magnificent for us. And I'm delighted to see that recently he's joined the Queensland Reds Super Rugby coaching team for the season ahead. And if he's half as successful with them as he was with our lads, and the innovation and the enthusiasm he brings to the game, then he'll be a tremendous asset to them. So there's a couple of lads. There's someone else, a couple more I'd pick out who I think are really interesting. So the most assiduous trainers we've had here, there's a guy called Dan Pollard, and Dan's a Cornish lad from Truro, and he would practice kicking like Johnny Wilkinson would practice kicking. And I used to live in Earlsfield, and he'd haul me out onto Wandsworth Common on a Saturday morning, Sunday afternoons to practice kicking with him. And this guy was absolutely assiduous, and of course was a brilliant kicker. We won one game, I remember, 3-0 at Trojans. It's one of my proudest moments because we had a really poor side that day, but Dan could kick, and I just set up for us to defend as manfully as we could and try and nick a penalty. And he hit one from the halfway line, way left out by their little clubhouse. And that was enough for me to win 3-0, and I was so happy with that. He then went to Bournemouth when they were in the National Leagues, and it wasn't a surprise to me that he earned 200 or 300 points for them in a season. Before I think he moved now to Norway and gave up the game, but he was probably the best trainer along with our other claim to fame, which is Mark Ozzy Tutu, known to many as Neutrino from So Solid Crew, who saw us training in Battersea Park back in the day and approached me and said, I've seen you guys, can you teach me how to play rugby? And Mark has an aptitude and a desire to learn the game of rugby. And by then he was already mid-20s. He's been with the club a decade. He went fourths, thirds, seconds, first, was player of the year in the first team, a couple of seasons running. He's still playing for us today. His attitude and desire and thirst for knowledge is just fantastic. And he's somebody that never played rugby at any kind of a school level. He just had an amazing physique because he spends a lot of his week working out, and is a real example to players from every background of what you can achieve with hard work and dedication, and still doing his gigs. We'd laugh because we'd say, right lads, who's going out? And he'd go, sorry lads, I'm catching a plane to Cyprus tonight. I've got to do a gig at 3 a.m. Okay, Mark, all right, well, good to see you.
That is amazing. I never thought I'd hear anything like that in one of these interviews. That's incredible. And like you say, still playing today?
Still playing, yeah. And he told me, I call him Mark, and he said, everyone calls him Nooch, and he said, people generally, only my mum calls me Mark. And I said, well, it's your mum and your coach now.
Fair enough. So just going back to Dan Leo, would you say that his influence is still almost trickling down now? Would you say that there's some longevity to that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he was here when Paul Spivey, who's our head coach these days, was here. And I think Paul saw a lot of what Dan brought in terms of some of his approaches, which are, some unusual training drills that, the forwards loved him, absolutely loved him.
Have you got any examples of?
Well, there was a wrestling one-on-one wrestling, a sort of almost like Greco wrestling sort of thing that he did, and it's difficult to get tight head props enthused about training, but somehow our tight head props loved it more than anything. And as far as I could tell, it was like a couple of lads rolling on the floor, which many listeners will probably think is rugby anyway. But they absolutely loved it, and the laughter and fun that they had. From those sessions, you still see it in some of the things we do today. And Dan is somebody that, I think he might be coming over for a holiday at some point. We'll always get him back because he's a tremendous breath of fresh air to have around.
Yeah, for sure. Now, talk to me a little bit about your coaching setup here now, because I know Paul came in halfway through last season. So how is it all settled down? How are you going at the moment?
Yeah, so we had an amazing guy, a lovely guy called Connie Durant, who was our coach through the first half of last season. He let me know that he was going to be stepping down at the end of the season. And I felt that perhaps we should kick on with that halfway through the season. So we made that change. And in fact, Cornet is a top guy, one of the nicest people you can meet, is now involved in our mini setup. He's got his own sort of like tiny kids thing called Tiny Tacklers that he runs in the area. And it's fantastic. For I think under 5s or under 6s, and so he's doing that now with us. So I recruited a pretty stellar coaching team. So I had Cam Crozier has rejoined us. So Cam is a player who got very badly injured on a 4G pitch, so badly that for a few years he couldn't walk, so he had to retire from playing. But he played for Glasgow. He played in the in Pro D. Really good level. So he's joined us as our defence coach and our twos coach. We also have Mattis Jeravicius from Harlequins.
Oh, yeah.
I've got to get that pronunciation right. He has come in as well. And this is his first coaching gig. So we're going to look for some innovation from him and some of our coaching. And he's also helping us with our set pieces. And I needed a backs coach. So I advertised, and I knew what I wanted in my head. I wanted a pro player, perhaps who had some ties to the West Country, who'd be interested in coming down and earning a little bit of money. As I say, we don't pay very much, but who was trying to go through their coaching badges. I only got one reply, but I couldn't have wished for a better reply, because it's Max Badilli, who is a Cornishman through and through, who's played in the Prem for Exeter, who's now at Ealing and doing great things for them. Who's local to us and is just a top bloke and is known through a lot of our lads because they're Cornish and he's Cornish, and they've known him through the age grades in Cornwall. So he's absolutely perfect for us. So we've got him, and we've got Cam, we've got Mattis, we've got Spives, and we also have George Kimmins is our first team fly half captain, and sometimes fly half. He want me to say fly half, but that's probably not what we're playing this season. And he's also doing his coaching badge. He's another sort of head of PE. And so he is involved as well, looking at our skills. And so we think that's a pretty good group. Certainly attendances at training are high, and I'd expect as the baking weather cools down, we'll see those numbers spike again.
Yeah, good stuff. I mean, I think it's good to have a coaching group, as you've just described there, because one voice can certainly get a bit stale, even two can. So having different people with different specialities, I mean, it's the modern way, and I'm completely on board with that, I think.
It is. We've also got Nick Rees in, who's doing a job as our strength and conditioning coach. So Nick may be another name that you and I know mutually. And so that's the first time we've ever had a strength and conditioning coach. And again, I think the lads are lapping it up. There seems to be an appetite for it.
Yeah, Nick was my strength and conditioning coach when I was at Ealing. And honestly, I was never in better shape. That was the best shape I was in my entire career that year under Nick. He had huge respect from all the players there, and people just, absolutely bought into everything that he put in front of us.
So Nick, if you're listening, you just capture that little snippet there from Tim, and that's your kind of case study done for you. That's free, by the way, no charge.
Absolutely. Now, you talked about this coming season and the start of this coming season. Looking out on the pitches now, describe what you're seeing and the challenges that's going to set up for rugby across the country.
I'm fortunate to have, I've been in the rugby cells for quite a long time, so quite a lot of the sort of the hierarchy at the RFU know who I am, and I'm not shy about giving them my opinions. I think if you have been doing the role for a long time, you should feel able to talk to people. And my view very strongly is we can't start the season on September the 3rd with the pitches in their current state. And there are a couple of reasons for this. The first is that even if it rains in the next week or so, it will not enable enough rugby to be played that players will be match fit by the time September the 3rd comes. And I also feel strongly that the view that you can play the season at the start all on AGPs is not a decision that should be born out of duty of care to the players, because I don't believe that AGPs are the direction rugby should be going in. They're banned in the Netherlands for various reasons, and over here the worst injuries we've had in my time at the club, and that includes broken necks, have been on AGPs. And we train on one, but we don't go full bore, which is now the advice I gather for clubs training to reduce the level of contact. We don't go as full bore as we do in matches, and so I think it would be remiss of the RFU to say, right, we're going to start the season, everyone has to play on AGPs. I think that is not the right direction. By all means, use them occasionally, but not everybody playing on them all the time. I think you'll see a huge spike in serious injuries if we do that.
Yeah, and what about long term? Have you got any thoughts about the long term connotations of playing on AGPs?
Yeah, I don't think we know the truth yet about what those long-term impacts will be, but I'm pretty sure if you ask some of the Prem players at Saracens who are no longer playing anymore how their knees and their shoulders are, I suspect they will not be in as great a shape as some of their cohorts who've been in playing on grass pitches. I don't yet have enough evidence to back that up, so I'm saying that as a view. I know from my own part playing on them, I didn't like them one little bit. They're really tough on your hamstrings, they're tough on your joints, to say nothing of the burns you get from them.
Yeah, this is something I'm really interested in, because I never ever played on one, and in fact I never coached a team that played on one either. So my personal experience on this is zero, but a lot of the pro players, I should say, are very vocal about their dislike of them as well. But then I've been to lots of clubs around the country where they really quite like them. So I think it's a really interesting subject, and one that does need further investigation.
I have a strong view as well that rugby, the beauty of rugby is that whatever size you are and whatever kind of player you are, there is a home for you in rugby. And I don't think that home is matched to playing on AGPs for players of a certain size and stature. I think you cannot get away from the fact that rugby is played across all seasons, and playing rugby in heavy ground has every much right to be part of the game as playing rugby on a hard ground in both ends of the season. And I know for my part, and I was a fullback, that I was never happier than when it was drizzling and the ground was heavy. I'm a heavy ground horse, I don't mind admitting it. Perhaps I had a deceptive lack of pace and that helped. I love playing in that weather, and I think the game will be the poorer for moving either towards a sort of summer. Well, you're seeing today, what would happen if we did that, but moving to a world where AGPs were dominant.
And are you talking about the pro game or the grassroots game or both?
I cannot speak on behalf of the pro game. I've played and coached at all levels from 13. I don't know what you call the county championship, probably 4. So all the way up to that point, I would say that's the amateur and semi-pro. So I can't speak for the clubs at the professional end, but I can from a grassroots point of view, and that's my view that grassroots would be the poorer for having to play all the games on AGB.
Fair enough. Okay, let's look at rugby at this level and actually the hierarchy overall within English rugby, because it's had a pretty big shake-up this summer. So I'd love to hear, firstly, detail that for me if you can, and then your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so we had the reorganisation of all leagues beneath level 2, I think, across the country. And this is the men's adult game. I should be clear about that. The idea was that the feedback was that the players were playing too much rugby and travelling too much. Now, I have a lot of issues with this, both in terms of the analysis of the data the RFU used to make these changes and the implementation of it. There is no doubt, I think, that at the National League level, there was a need for less travel and perhaps less games. I think a 30-game season is way too much. A 26-game season is far more palatable at that level. At smaller travel distances, far more preferable. However, you can't get away from geography. There are extremities in this country, and the clubs that get up through the leagues are going to have to bite that. And my hometown club, Redruth, are right in the middle of that, having to travel, even in the new league, huge distances. But if any club can do it, the Reds can, and are a wonderfully coached club and tremendously supported as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they do in the new league. However, at the levels at which we are playing, 5, 6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 7 particularly, the implementation of the changes has been founded on the premise that players want to play less rugby and want cup rugby. Now, I've found nothing to support that in the statistics that the RFU provided. I have an online going dialogue with Bill Sweeney about this, and I've sent him both the statistics that were used and my views. However, having said that, we are where we are. We've got these new leagues. For our part, London Cornish are in a new league at level 6 called Regional 2 Thames, which will take us to 7 clubs we've never played before in our history. As the crow flies, probably less distance, but most of those journeys are around the M25, and I've gone to every single one of those clubs we'll be playing. I always go to the clubs that we'll be playing in the new season that we've never played before. I like to know the journey, I like to look at the grounds, I like to smell where the club is at, and I've been to all of them. They're cracking facilities, I've got nothing against any of them, but the journey times are horrendous. So we are going to be travelling far more than we ever did at this level.
Wow.
And so it hasn't done what it was meant to do. We also have this afterthought of a cup at the end of the season. Now, I have a very strong view. In my 20 years, cups, national or otherwise, have withered on the vine of grassroots rugby. Players may well give you the view that, yes, I'd love to play at Twickenham, and yes, I'll support them. That is not supported by the evidence of their availability. We got all the way through to the quarter-final of the Intermediate Cup a few seasons back. The season we went unbeaten. And we had Charlton Park on this pitch right here. It was the only game in the season when I couldn't get players available. We had to pull a player out of retirement in order to play in that game. We lost. I've got no qualms about the fact Charlton Park were a cracking team and deserved their win on the day. But it just showed me that there isn't an appetite for cup rugby. Now, Bill, in his duty as CEO, has done a fantastic job of going around the country and seeing rugby at the grassroots level. And he says that whenever he talks to players, they're all up for it. And my counter to that is, that's always been the case. They've always been up for it until you ask them to be available. And so we now have this cup that runs from mid-March to sort of mid-April at the end of the season. And I firmly believe that we will see an awful lot of walkovers. And I think we might look at changing that so that the 22-game season, which is what it now is spread over a longer period of time, perhaps starts a week or two later and spreads through to April. The other thing I have a real problem with is in flattening the pyramid, which is what they've done. They've flattened the structure to make it more difficult for clubs to fly up the leagues and fly down. They've closed the aperture to aspirational clubs like ours and others like us by only promoting one team out of each of these 12-team leagues. There's no playoffs anymore. We've been involved with 2 or 3 playoffs since I've been here, and they're cracking days out. They're absolutely fantastic. And so now, if you lose a couple of games at the early part of the season, you're going to have a whole phalanx of clubs who've got nothing to play for. And I think that's something that we might look at sooner rather than later, in conjunction with this idea that these cups are just a complete waste of time. And by the way, we haven't yet seen the implementation of what these cups are going to look like in terms of who you're going to be playing. But you can't tell me that if you're second or third bottom of a league and are getting spanked every week, that you're going to want to play a side that's going to put 40 or 50 points on you in a cup match. I know I had a director of rugby, head coach at another club local to us, phone me this week and say he's already had 8 of his first team telling him not to expect the players to be available for the cup.
Is that cup competition? Does every team have to enter, or is it?
It's voluntary to enter.
Voluntary.
But again, I go back to the point I made earlier that basically what you're saying then is the rugby season will be played in the main in the winter because the league season, because you're going to be cut rugby off early in March. So those lads that are the quick wingers of the world, what do they do from November to March? There are lads that relish those hard ground conditions, and I think, as I say, rugby should be played over the whole season, and I don't think we're going to see that. I think that also means the cup will be played possibly in conditions where the ground is going to be quicker, and so clubs with decent sets of backs might well fancy it. It's going to be, I know that there are going to be iterations on this reorg, and I hope they happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Really good to have your views on that, because I've spoken to a few people who definitely think it's quite a positive thing, and maybe outwardly it might appear that way, but having some opposing views is definitely very valuable.
Yeah, and I would add this. I mean, we are where we are, so we've got this league that we're coming up to, and I know both our supporters and a lot of our players who've been at the club a while are really looking forward to playing a whole load of new clubs. And having been to all of these grounds, there's some cracking facilities there, and I know that will be really welcomed by all of those clubs, as we will give them a welcome and a pasty and a pint when they come here. We are going to embrace that fully, but all the while the dialogue should continue on the shape and the structure of the season. One other bugbear while we're on the subject: a lot of these decisions are made by people who are embedded in rugby, but there are people involved in this reorganisation who've come from other sports, and I have a strong view that we've gone too far in trying to copy other sports. Rugby is it's a unique sport in the way that it appeals to every shape and size of person, in the way that the roots of rugby are deep into the community, in the way that the friendships and the post-match celebrations are joined together by both clubs involved. And I think you cannot rewrite that and try and rebuild it. And if you look at the reorg, and I'm thinking now 7 and 6 here particularly, we and other clubs have built long-standing relationships with clubs, and so we're going to be building a load of new ones. As a director of rugby, I look at how, as an amateur club, we can plot our way every season out of our league, and it might be incremental. It might take a little bit of improvement each year, and I know that to beat that side we've got to do this, or to beat that side we've got to do that. Now we're going to be in a position where, with this league reorg, you've got 18 sides promoted into 12 leagues from 7 to 6. And so, 24 sides, because you've got 18 and you've got the best 6 playing records of the sides that are at that level, coming up into the league above. Well, It's not an even split. 2 down as well. So how's that going to happen? What's going to happen is at the end of the season, the RFU will have to throw all the same names of those level 6 clubs up in the air again and rewrite the leagues all over again. So for a club like ours that sit right on the cusp of 2 or 3 different regions, we could be thrown around from one league to another year on year. And so the opportunity for me to try and build our way out of a league or work out what needs to happen as we go to different clubs is gone. We now have to start afresh every single season. And I think that is another problem with this reorg. And I'm only looking at our level. I'm sure there are replications of that analysis in other regions as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And also, you don't then get to build those relationships with all the other clubs in your league on a year-on-year basis, because that's, as you kind of alluded to earlier, that's one of the great things about our sport. Going to these local derbies and getting to know the coaches and the players and all that kind of thing, and building up on friendly rivalries, sometimes less friendly, but it doesn't really matter. It's all part of the game.
It is, and those friendly rivalries are huge. There's some clubs that we're a club that seem to get on quite well with a lot of clubs, and there are some clubs that we get on with that other people haven't necessarily got on with before, and they've got a bad rap. And those long-standing relationships, clubs against whom we've been playing for most of my time here, are lost for the time being. And you might find that when we go and play them again, the characters that were involved and that with whom we've built those strong relationships over a period of time are gone and moved on. I think that'll be a real shame. Yes, sure, you can reach out to people, but it's not. You're not going to be spending your time reaching out to lots of people who aren't in your league all the time. There's only so many hours in the day.
Thanks very much again to Dickon. Some really wonderful stuff so far, and a lot more to come as well. I've decided to split this interview across 2 episodes as there is just so much quality in it. How has your club been affected by the new structure? Is it positive? Or like Dickon, do you have some reservations? I'd love to hear what you think at AN Rugby Podcast on Twitter, or email to hello@amateurrugbypodcast.com. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, you could rate and review on your podcast player, like, share, retweet, all that stuff. But what I'd really like is if you mention it to someone in person the next time you're down your local rugby club. I'll be back with you next week when my guest will once again be London Cornish Director of Rugby of 20 years, Dickon Moon. We go on to cover a whole bunch of new and interesting topics, so subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. My legs are absolutely in pieces today after my long run yesterday, but now I just have to rest, recuperate, and look forward to starting the great Rugger Run on the 7th of September. So, until next week, get out and play. This episode was also sponsored by WebPie for all your WordPress website needs. Do you need a website, or do you know someone that does? Trust the rugby family and think of my company, WebPie, that's WEBPI, for your WordPress website design, build and support services. Find out more at webpie.co, that's WEBPI.co.